Hi, I'm Emily Rooney, and here, surrounded by images of the University of Chicago, Milton's intellectual home, we'll engage four distinguished guests in a discussion of the relevance of Friedman's ideas today.
It was Jefferson who wrote these words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." What he meant by the words equal can be seen in the phrase endowed by their Creator. To Thomas Jefferson, all men are equal in the eyes of God. They all must be treated as individuals who have, each separately, a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Of course, practice did not conform to the ideals in Jefferson's life or in ours as a nation. He agonized repeatedly during his lifetime about the conflict between the institution of slavery and the fine words of the Declaration. Yet, during his whole life, he was a slave owner. During the 19th century, and especially after the Civil War and on into the 20th century, the idea of equality came more and more to mean that everyone should have the same opportunity to make what he could of his capacities, that all careers should be open to people on the basis of their talents, independently of the race or religion or belief or social class that characterized them. This concept of equality of opportunity offers no conflict at all with the concept of freedom. On the contrary, they reinforce one another, and it is no doubt the concept that even today is most widely held. But in the 20th century, beginning especially abroad and at a later date in this country, a very different concept, a very different ideal has begun to emerge. That is the ideal that everyone should be equal in income, in level of living, in what he has. The idea that the economic race should be so arranged that everybody ends at the finish line at the same time, rather than that everyone starts at the beginning line at the same time. This concept raises a very serious problem for freedom. It is clearly in conflict with it, since it requires that the freedom of some be restricted in order to provide greater benefits to others. The society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither. The society that puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both.
John, do you think that's true? Milton Friedman was saying that in the 1980s that our ideal was that everybody should have equal income, equal living circumstances. Do you think that's true?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there was, and I don't think the sort of ideal, as he calls it, of equality of outcome ever had any serious force in this country. I think mostly what people were arguing for, that he might call equality of outcome, is just the government involvement in the guaranteeing of equal opportunity and the removal of barriers to equal opportunity. And it's where you get in that gray area between the sort of ideal extremes and where you have to actually advocate for one thing or another and develop the role of government in the guarantee of equal opportunity. That's when you start getting into the arguments about who's right or wrong about the role of government.
And whether the outcome should be equal as well.
Well, I think that the only kind of equality that is consistent with personal liberty is equality before the law. But however, looking at equality of opportunity as a concept, it really just doesn't tell you very much. That is, I don't have an equal opportunity to be a great boxer. I don't have the equal opportunity to be a great basketball player. And I don't have the equal opportunity to do many, many things. So I think that the only kind of equality we should be striving for is equality before the law.
Well, just to respond to John's point, I think when Milton Friedman made this clip, affirmative action was at its heyday. And affirmative action, which started off as equality of opportunity, had actually morphed into, and still has morphed into, something like equality of outcome. Because if you look at the admission practices of a lot of universities, what they are trying to do is get proportional representation by ethnic group, by various different criteria. And that's because they feel unless they arrange for equal outcomes, there's no way to measure equality of opportunity. The only way to measure equality of opportunity is through equality of outcomes. And so they have prearranged the outcomes, and I think that's the kind of mindset that Milton Friedman was talking about at the time.
Well, I thought it was interesting that Thomas Jefferson was invoked in this context, because Jefferson, at least as I recall it, had a fairly robust sort of conception of equal citizenship, where it was important not just for people to have a sort of formal, hollow equality, but he wanted to see a society of sort of farmer-owner practitioners. It's difficult to know, what that would mean in the modern context, but the idea is that, everyone needs to have access to certain kinds of economic resources to have real opportunity to be a meaningful participant in society. And not, I think, just a sort of empty legal equality.
Going back to your point, though, Thomas Jefferson had slaves, and the free market essentially created slavery. But the free market wasn't going to take that away. It wasn't going to take discrimination away. It wasn't going to take Jim Crow laws away. So without some kind of government intervention, why wouldn't that have continued?
Well, I don't think slavery is consistent with the free market. That is, the free market has something to do with private property rights and self-ownership. And slavery is a violation of the essential principles of free markets. So slavery is more, it's something like the forcible use of one person to serve the purposes of another. And that has to be offensive to anybody who believes in personal liberty.
But it took government to fix it. The market itself wasn't going to fix it.
It wasn't going to self-correct.
And if you equate freedom, it's difficult really to understand what Friedman meant by freedom here. That's a very mushy concept. Everybody gives up some freedom, right? We pay taxes. If you're a policeman, you submit to discipline, so you do the job well. And so the issue isn't, is there some pure freedom, unfettered life that is even possible for anybody, but where are we going to draw the line? In a very pragmatic sense, there's a tension between personal freedom and the common good. And I think they're both important, laudable goals, and the idea is to seek the balance there. And in the question of slavery, you had to have a government role in order to bring it to an end, because the market wasn't going to do it.
You agree with that?
Well, no, I actually think the reason we needed government to get rid of discrimination and slavery was because government had created the problem in the first place. It was the government that was enforcing, even during Jefferson's time, that the idea of enslavement, that one person could own another person, that was a government enforced institutionalization. Which is why we then had to, a whole culture developed around certain government practices, which then you needed a violent government action like the Civil War to get rid of. And then later on, of course, we still didn't have equality. We still had Jim Crow laws in this country, which required a further government step, which was the Civil Rights Act, to get rid of that. But this was a problem. Slavery was a government-created and supported institution, and it had nothing really to do with the free market.
But I think however you construe the origin of the problem, it's still the case that the Civil Rights Act involved some significant curtailments of private property rights. But I would say, and I think the vast majority of people would say, it was good for freedom in any kind of meaningful sense.
No, I don't think it was good at all. That is, I think that when the Civil Rights Act was written, I think that instead the government should have said that the Constitution applies to all Americans, and that was it. But however, see, I think one of the points that people fail to take into consideration, that as was said earlier, that most of the problems that Black Americans faced in our country then and now is a result of government.
Milton Friedman says that you shouldn't be restricting the personal freedoms of a few to benefit others. Isn't that what affirmative action does?
Essentially, I think that's exactly what it does. Now, I think, we have affirmative action in this country, not just for people at the lower end of the strata. We have affirmative action for people at the upper end of the strata. A whole host of universities use legacy preferences, which is affirmative action for the rich. And they all, and what again, it goes back to Milton Friedman's point that we are trying to arrange equality of outcomes because we want X number of people, who are in, upper echelons of New England to go to Harvard and certain number of Jews to go to Harvard. There were quotas against Jewish people in this country, at Harvard for a very long time. And so very affirmative action is very much an equality of outcome.
The point of it was to create equality for, originally for African Americans because of the legacy of slavery. That was the idea, that it would give equal opportunity where it didn't exist before.
Well,
was it necessary?
In my view, it was not necessary. In fact, if Abigail Thurnstorm and Stephen Thurnstorm have done some wonderful work in which they have actually documented how black progress in universities, both in terms of attendance and graduation rates, had been going up quite rapidly till the 1970s when affirmative action became really big. And at that stage, actually, blacks started doing worse because they were getting into
rebut that?
universities without being properly prepared. And so they were going to universities.
Affirmative action.
And
I
affirmative action actually is a cause of keeping blacks back to some extent rather than their progress.
There's a profound achievement gap. It grows bigger and bigger every year between white and Asian American students and black and Hispanic. It's profound.
I don't accept it, but that doesn't mean that affirmative action is necessary. Look, for example, at one time, blacks were not allowed in basketball. Today, 80% of professional basketball players are black. And it didn't happen because of affirmative action. It happened because these guys could do a 360 slam dunk in your face and you couldn't do anything about it. The same thing in baseball, the same thing in football, 66%. Are these results of affirmative action?
Moving on. Okay.